She was 10 years old, soaking wet from the January rain, and she walked through the doors of the most dangerous clubhouse in Harlan County like she owned every inch of it. 23 men went silent, not because she was loud, not because she carried a weapon, because in her small, trembling fist she held a silver bullet, and every man in that room recognized it, the kind of bullet only one man in the world knew how to make, a man they buried in their memories 10 years ago, a man they believed was dead. She looked straight at the biggest, scariest biker in the room, and she asked the question that would shatter everything they thought they knew. "Are you my father?" If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to the channel and follow along until the very end, because what comes next will shake you to your core. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us the city and country where you're watching. We want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The rain had been falling on Harlan's Creek for 3 days straight. Not the soft kind of rain that washes things clean, the hard, angry kind. The kind that turns dirt roads into brown rivers and reminds you that nature doesn't care who you are or what you've been through. The kind that settles into the bones of old buildings and old men and refuses to leave. The Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club had called Harlan's Creek home for 22 years, and the clubhouse on the edge of Route 9 had absorbed every one of those years into its walls. Cracked wood paneling, a bar counter scarred with knife marks and cigarette burns, 2 pool tables, one of them permanently tilted on the left side, neon signs, a red one for a beer brand nobody drank anymore, a blue one shaped like a skull, threw broken color across the faces of men who had stopped apologizing for what they looked like a long time ago. Tonight, the main room held 23 of them. Some sat at the bar nursing whiskey they weren't really drinking. Some played cards at the back table with the focused silence of men who needed their hands busy. 3 stood near the fireplace that burned low and orange, not speaking, just watching the flames like the fire might tell them something useful. Colt Bear Maddox sat at the head of the long table near the window. He was 51 years old, 6'4", and built like a man who had been in enough fights to stop fearing them. His beard was shot through with gray. His hands, massive, scarred across the knuckles, rested flat on the table. The president's patch on his chest wasn't decoration. It was a weight he'd chosen to carry every single day for the past 14 years. And some nights you could see that weight in the way his shoulders sat, like they'd been loaded and never fully unloaded. Bear wasn't brooding tonight. He was thinking. There was a difference, though most people couldn't tell it on his face. The Reapers were having a quiet stretch, which in their world meant something was about to go wrong. Quiet stretches never lasted. They were the universe catching its breath before it threw something at you. Mason Snake. Cole sat 2 seats down, laptop open, fingers moving across the keyboard with a speed that always looked slightly wrong on a man who had the build of a longshoreman. Snake was 44, lean through the shoulders, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his jaw, a souvenir from a roadside IED in Kandahar that he never talked about and never had to. His eyes moved constantly, even when the rest of him was still. Tech specialist, communications, background checks, digital forensics. Snake was the brain the club used when fists weren't enough. Right now he was running weather reports and scanning a frequency he'd flagged 3 weeks ago. Something off the county bandwidth. Nothing confirmed. Just a pattern that felt wrong in a way he couldn't yet explain. He hadn't told Bear yet. He would, when he had more than a feeling. Outside, the rain hammered the roof like it had a grudge. Dex Hound Riley was the first one to hear it. He was near the door, leaning against the wall with a cigarette burning between his fingers, not smoking it, just letting it burn down the way he always did when he was keeping watch. Hound was 53, the club's road captain, a former Army Ranger with hearing damage in his left ear from a grenade that killed 2 men standing closer to it than him. The hearing damage was selective, he always said. He couldn't hear his ex-wife ask him about the utility bill from the next room, but he could hear a Harley engine from a mile away in a rainstorm, and he could hear footsteps on gravel when they shouldn't be there. These footsteps were different, small, slow, like whoever was making them wasn't sure they should be making them at all. He pushed off the wall and put out the cigarette against the wood. "Bear." That was all he said, one word. But in 22 years, Hound had never used that tone for anything that didn't matter. Bear's head came up. The door opened. She came in on a gust of cold January air that hit the room like a slap. Rain dripped from her hair, a dark tangle plastered flat against her forehead and cheeks. She was small for 10. Thin arms, narrow shoulders, the kind of small that comes not from genetics, but from not having had enough. Her shoes were canvas sneakers, soaked through, leaving wet prints on the wooden floor with every step she took. She wore a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big, jeans with a tear above the right knee, a backpack on her shoulders that sagged like it was carrying everything she had left in the world. But she walked in like she'd been here before, or like she'd decided, somewhere between the rain and the dark, and whatever had happened to bring her here, that she was done being scared of what she'd find. 23 men went completely still. No one reached for anything. No one moved. The room did that involuntary thing. It sometimes did when something happened that broke outside the known variables. A collective pause. Every brain running the same calculation. What is this? What does it mean? How do we respond? The girl stopped in the middle of the floor. Her eyes swept the room once, fast. The way someone looks when they've learned that reading a room quickly is a survival skill. She clocked the exits. She clocked the men closest to her. And then her gaze found Bear at the head of the table, and it stayed there. Her right hand was closed in a fist. She held it out. She opened it. In her palm lay a bullet. Not a cartridge. The brass had been removed. The bullet itself. Steel-jacketed, hand-formed, with markings along the side that were not standard manufacture. Hand-etched. 2 thin lines spiraling around the casing in a pattern that was specific, deliberate, and unmistakable. Bear didn't move. But something in his face shifted. Hound made a sound, not quite a word, something lower than that. Snake's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. The girl's voice, when it came, was steady. Not because she wasn't afraid. You could see the fear in the way her jaw was set too tight, the way her free hand gripped the strap of her backpack hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She was afraid. She'd decided to do this anyway. "My mother told me to find the Iron Reapers," she said. "She said you knew the man who made this." She paused, and then, "Are you my father?" She was looking at Bear. Bear didn't answer, not right away. He stood up, slowly, the way big men move when they're being careful not to frighten something that's already frightened, and walked around the table. He crouched down to her eye level, which was not a natural position for a man his size, and he looked at the bullet in her palm. He didn't touch it. His eyes came up to hers. "What's your name?" "Lena." A beat. "Lena Alvarez." Not a flicker of recognition at the last name from Bear. But behind him, Snake had gone very still in a way that was different from his regular stillness. And Hound had taken exactly 1 step closer to the door and stopped, and his hand had moved to his side. Not to a weapon, but in the way a man's hand moves when his body is reacting before his brain has finished processing. "How old are you, Lena?" 10. She didn't blink. "How old are you?" A couple of men in the back exhaled. It might have been a laugh under different circumstances. Under these circumstances, it was just the sound of tension breaking the surface for a single moment. "Old enough to know you shouldn't be out alone in this weather," Bear said. "Where's your mother?" Something happened in the girl's eyes. Not a crumbling shit. She didn't let herself crumble. But the word landed somewhere deep, and the impact of it showed, just for a second before she put it back behind the steadiness. "She died," Lena said. 4 days ago." The room stayed quiet. She was sick for a while, but at the end it went fast. She said it like she was reporting facts, like she'd learned that if she kept it factual, she could keep holding it. "She told me before she died. She said dangerous people were going to come looking for me. She said I couldn't go to the police. She said find the Iron Reapers. She said they would know what to do." Bear looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened to his full height and turned back to the room. "Somebody get a towel and coffee. The real stuff, not the machine." Dex Riley, the oldest man in the room, turned and walked toward the back without being asked twice. Her name was Elena Maria Alvarez, and her mother had been Carmen Alvarez, and she had grown up in a 2-room apartment in Mill Haven, which was a town 47 miles east of Harlan's Creek that existed primarily as proof that rural poverty in America could put down roots and hold on for decades, without anyone in a position of authority feeling particularly moved to do anything about it. Carmen Alvarez had worked the early shift at a roadside diner for 9 years. She had kept a clean apartment, kept her daughter in school, kept the lights on. She had never asked anyone for anything she couldn't eventually find a way to repay. She had a laugh, according to Lena, that made the whole diner turn around when something was funny enough to pull it out of her. She had also, 4 months ago, been diagnosed with an aggressive cardiac condition that the county's medical system had managed with the particular brand of efficient uselessness reserved for people without adequate insurance. She'd been given a prescription she couldn't fully afford and follow-up appointments she had to reschedule twice because the diner didn't pay for sick days. She had died in the small hours of a Tuesday morning with Lena beside her. Before she died, she had pressed the bullet pendant into her daughter's hand, and she had told her a name: Elias Navarro. Lena sat at the bar now with a mug of coffee she was warming her hands on rather than drinking. Someone, a big, quiet man with a red beard who hadn't introduced himself, had produced a dry hoodie that was approximately 4 times her size, and she wore it now over her wet clothes. She'd stopped shaking, mostly. The room had settled back into movement, men resuming positions, conversations restarting in low murmurs. But the dynamic had shifted the way it does when a foreign element enters a system and the system has to recalibrate around it. Bear sat across the bar from her. Snake had pulled a stool close but slightly to the side, within earshot, angled so he could watch her face without making it a confrontation. "Tell me about the bullet," Bear said. Lena set the pendant on the bar between them. Up close, the engravings were more visible. The 2 spiral lines ran from base to tip with mathematical precision. And there was something else, near the base of the casing, barely visible without leaning in, a set of characters that could have been numbers or letters or both. Snake leaned in. He didn't touch it either. "May I?" Lena looked at him, then nodded. He picked it up with 2 fingers, turned it under the light. His expression didn't change much, but Bear had known Snake for 16 years, and he could read the microsignals, the slight tension around the eyes, the controlled exhale through the nose. "Where did she get it?" Snake asked. "She never said exactly," Lena said. "She said a man gave it to her, a long time ago, before I was born." She wrapped both hands around the mug again. "She said if anything ever happened to her, I should take it and find the Iron Reapers. She said the man who made it would explain everything." "The man who made it," Bear repeated. "Elias Navarro," Lena said. "That's the name she gave me." She looked at Bear steadily. "She said he might be my father." The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous silences. This one had weight. It had history in it. Hound, who had been leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, turned and walked outside without a word. The door to the back corridor opened and 2 other men, Frankie Dunn, the club's sergeant-at-arms, and a newer member everyone called Patch, exchanged a look over Lena's head that said something in a language she wasn't being shown. Bear's face was unreadable, which meant he was working hard to keep it that way. "Elias Navarro," he said, finally. "You know who that is?" "My mother's friend," Lena said. Except she wouldn't tell me more than that. She got a look on her face when she said his name. She paused, like she was sad and angry at the same time. "How'd you get here?" Bear asked. "Millhaven's 40-some miles. Bus to Clover Junction, then I walked the last part." She said it matter-of-factly, the way you say something when you don't want to think about how hard it was. "I had the name of the road." She had walked 7 miles in January rain to get to a motorcycle club she'd only heard about from her dying mother. Bear looked at her. This 10-year-old girl in an oversized hoodie with wet shoes and a mug of coffee and more composure than most grown men he'd faced down. And he felt something behind his sternum that he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't pity. He'd have to think later to find the right word for it. "Has anyone come to the apartment since your mother died?" Snake asked. "The landlord," Lena said, "and 2 people I didn't know." Something shifted in her expression. "They said they were from a social services office, but they didn't show ID when I asked. They said they didn't need to." "What did they look like?" "Dressed too nice for social services," Lena said. "One was tall, short hair. He had a watch that cost more than our rent." She looked at Snake directly. "I know what expensive watches look like. My mom used to point them out. She said it was important to know who had money and who was pretending not to." Snake looked at Bear. Bear said, "When was this?" "Day before yesterday," Lena said. "I didn't open the door all the way. I talked through the chain lock. They said they'd be back. She said it calmly, but there was something underneath it. The particular flatness in a child's voice when they have decided to be brave and are holding that decision together with both hands. They don't know you're here? Bear asked. I don't think so, Lena said. I didn't tell anyone. I left before it got light. Snake was already on his laptop. His fingers had resumed their movement. Bear watched him work for a moment, then turned back to the girl. Lena. He waited until she met his eyes. Elias Navarro was a member of this club. He said it carefully, the way you say something when the saying of it costs something. He disappeared 10 years ago. We didn't know what happened to him. A pause. Most of us thought he was dead. Lena absorbed this. Her fingers tightened on the mug. Most of you, she said. Yeah. Not all of you. Bear's eyes moved, just slightly. No, he said. Not all. She reached out and picked up the bullet pendant from the bar, held it, turned it over once. Then maybe, she said. He isn't. What? Ghost. That was what they'd called Elias Navarro. Not because he was quiet, though he was, not because he had the 1,000-yard stare that combat left on certain men, though he had that too. It was because of what he could do with a weapon, specifically with a rifle and distance and patience. He could disappear into a landscape and reappear behind a problem that everyone else was trying to solve from the front. He'd served 2 tours with the Marines. Scout sniper. The kind of service that put things in a man that he spent the rest of his life learning to live with. He'd come to the Iron Reapers through Hound. They'd served in overlapping theaters, different branches, but the bond was the kind that forms in heat and doesn't break in ordinary circumstances. Ghost had joined as a full-patch member 11 years ago and found in the Brotherhood what a lot of veterans found in it: structure, purpose, people who didn't need things explained to them because they already understood. He'd also been the club's weapons specialist, firearms maintenance, modifications, custom work. He understood ballistics the way musicians understand pitch, intuitively, in his body. The custom bullets were his, a habit from his sniper days, a way of marking his work. No one else made them like that, which meant the bullet in Lena Alvarez's pendant was made by Ghost's hands. 10 years ago, Ghost had been arrested on charges of trafficking stolen military weapons across state lines. The evidence had been thorough, documented, and as the Iron Reapers believed in their bones, completely fabricated. The trial had moved fast. The public defender had been outmatched. Ghost had looked at his brothers from across a courtroom and told them with his eyes to let it go, that fighting it would make it worse. He'd been sentenced to 12 years federal. 6 months into his sentence, the facility had reported a transfer that never completed. The van had been found abandoned off Interstate 70. No blood, no body, no ghost. The marshals had listed him as escaped. The club had spent 2 years trying to find him, quietly, carefully, through channels that didn't involve officially sanctioned institutions, and found nothing, no trace, no contact. Eventually, the weight of not knowing had settled into the specific kind of grief that doesn't have a proper name. Not quite mourning because there was no confirmed death. Not quite hope because there was no confirmed life. And now this. Bear stood in the back room with Hound and Snake, and the door closed. The markings on the casing, Snake said. He'd taken photographs. He pulled them up on his laptop now. These 2 here, near the base, he pointed. That's not decorative, that's a code. How do you know? Hound asked. Because Ghost spent 6 months teaching me to read his shorthand before he disappeared, Snake said, in case he ever needed to communicate without anyone else understanding what he was saying. He looked at the screen. I haven't seen this particular sequence before, but the language is his. I'd need time to work it out. How much time? A few hours? Maybe less if I'm right about the cipher key. Bear looked at the closed door. Through it, the sounds of the main room, chairs, voices, the creak of the bar stools. The men that went to her apartment, Bear said. I pulled the county social services database, Snake said. No active cases opened for that address. No record of a visit scheduled. He paused. Whoever those men were, they weren't county. Private, Hound said. It wasn't a question. Or federal. Snake pulled up another screen. And here's the thing that's making me less comfortable by the minute. He turned the laptop around so they could see it. A communications log. Digital, fragmented, partially decoded. That frequency I've been watching for 3 weeks? It spiked tonight. 20 minutes before that girl walked through our door. Bear looked at him. Someone tracked her here. Or someone was already watching us and she led them to confirm something they already suspected. Snake's jaw was tight. Either way, we're already in this, Bear, whether we decide to be or not. Hound exhaled through his nose, rubbed the back of his neck. She asked if you were her father. I know. You're not. I know that too. Then somebody is, Hound said. And if what she's carrying is what I think it is, that somebody went to extreme lengths to make sure she'd end up exactly where she is right now. Bear looked at the closed door again, thought about the girl on the other side of it, 10 years old, wet shoes, 7 miles in the rain. They didn't show ID when I asked. I know what expensive watches look like. Ghost planned for this, Bear said. Not a question, not quite a statement either. Something between. If that bullet has what I think it has in the code, Snake said, then yeah, he planned for this. He looked at Bear, which means whatever he was trying to survive long enough to say, we're about to find out what it is. The rain outside redoubled without warning, a fresh wall of it hitting the roof hard enough to rattle the windows. And in the main room, a sound came through the walls. Not a voice, not a crash. The sound of an engine, not a Harley. Something heavier. Multiple somethings. The sound of tires on gravel moving with the careful, deliberate speed of vehicles that are not passing through. Vehicles that are arriving. Snake was already moving to the window. 3 black SUVs sat at the edge of the property, lights off, arranged in a pattern that any military man in the room would recognize immediately. A perimeter. Bear, Snake said quietly. Bear was already at the door to the main room. He opened it. The men inside the clubhouse had already felt the shift. The card game had stopped. 2 men near the back wall had moved without being told, positioning without discussion, the body memory of men who had been in situations where the difference between the right position and the wrong one was measured in lives. Bear looked at Lena Alvarez. She was still at the bar, still had both hands around the mug, but she was watching him with eyes that understood completely that something was happening. How far behind you do you think they were? Bear asked her. She didn't pretend not to understand. I didn't see headlights the whole way, she said, but it was raining hard. A pause. My mom said they'd be patient. Bear held her gaze for a second, then he turned to Frankie Dunn. Lock down the side entrance. Frankie was already moving. He turned to a younger member near the back. Reno, position. Reno moved without a sound. Bear walked to the front window and looked through the narrow gap at the edge of the curtain. The SUVs hadn't moved, engines still running. He could see the exhaust in the cold air. No one had exited. They were waiting for something, or for someone to make the first mistake. They're not county, Snake said from beside him, low. The plates are registration suspended federal contractor tags. Same pattern the DoD used to use for private security auxiliaries. What does that mean? Hound asked. It means they have more resources than the county sheriff, Snake said, and fewer rules. Bear looked at the bullet pendant sitting on the bar where Lena had left it. He thought about Ghost, about the last time he'd seen him in that courtroom, the way Ghost had looked at him. Not desperate, not pleading, just communicating something that Bear had spent 10 years trying to decode. Let it go. Except Ghost apparently had not let it go. Ghost had spent 10 years preparing for this moment, and he'd sent a 10-year-old girl through a January rainstorm to deliver the first piece of it. Bear walked back to the bar. He picked up the bullet pendant, held it in his fist for a moment. Then he crouched down in front of Lena again. Your mother told you to find us, he said. Why us? What exactly did she say? Lena met his eyes. She said the Iron Reapers were the only people in the world who would fight for the truth, she said, because you had nothing left to lose and nothing left to be afraid of. She paused. She also said that the man who made the bullet had a message inside it, Lena said. A message he put there 10 years ago, and that it would only mean something to the people who already knew what it meant. Bear stood up slowly. He turned and handed the bullet to Snake. Snake turned it under the light again, and this time he saw it. The angle, the character sequence, the cipher layer he hadn't yet tried. His face did something it almost never did. Bear, he said. Yeah. It's a location. The room was very quiet. Outside, the black SUVs sat in the rain, engines running, waiting, and somewhere in the distance, so faint it might have been imagination, might have been the wind, the sound of a single Harley engine moved through the dark. Coming closer. The sound was real. Bear heard it first because he was closest to the front window, and because after 30 years of riding, his body recognized a Harley engine the way other men recognized their own heartbeat. Single cylinder, old block, maybe mid-90s, running without lights, which you could do on a machine you knew well enough to ride blind, and which you only did when you didn't want to be seen. It was coming from the North Ridge, using the fire road that ran behind the tree line. Nobody knew that road existed except people who had ridden it. Snake heard it a second later. His head came up from the laptop. He looked at Bear and didn't say anything, but the question was in his face, and Bear had no answer for it yet, so he just gave a single shake of his head that meant, wait. Lena was watching both of them. She had that quality some children develop when they grow up in uncertain environments. The ability to read a room through the adults in it, to understand that the things not being said out loud were the things that mattered. She didn't ask what the sound was. She pulled the too large hoodie tighter around herself and held very still. Outside, the 3 black SUVs hadn't moved. That was the part that bothered Bear the most. Not that they were there, that they were waiting, patient, organized. People who are confident they control the situation don't rush. They let time work for them. Frankie, Bear said, not loud. Frankie Dunn appeared from the side corridor. 47 years old, built low and wide, with a face that looked like it had been broken and reset more than once and had stopped apologizing for the architecture. It was the club's sergeant-at-arms, which meant he was the one responsible for the safety of the Brotherhood in situations exactly like this one. His eyes went immediately to Bear and held there. 3 vehicles north side, Bear said. No plates I want to trust. No one's moved in 6 minutes. I counted 4 men per vehicle from the back window, Frankie said. Maybe more inside. 12 at minimum. Yeah. Bear looked at the room. 23 members, minus 2 who were out of county and 1 who was dealing with a family situation in Roanoke. 20 men present and accounted for, in a space they knew completely, with exits they knew better than anyone coming through the dark, in SUVs that probably had GPS and body armor, and the calm efficiency of men who did this professionally. The math wasn't clean, but it was the math they had. What do they want? Hound asked from the corner. He said it like a man who suspected he already knew the answer and wanted someone to contradict him. Snake answered. If this is what the code suggests it is, what Ghost left in that bullet, then they're not here for the club. His eyes went to Lena. They're here to make sure nobody reads the message. Lena looked at Snake. What does the message say? Snake held the bullet, turned it. He'd been running the cipher in his head since he first read the character sequence, and the longer he worked it, the clearer the shape of it became, and the clearer it became, the less comfortable he felt about it. I need more time, he said, and I need them not to come through that door while I'm working. Bear made a decision. He did it the way he always did, without announcing it, without asking for a vote, by simply beginning to move in the direction of what needed to happen. We don't go out to them, he said. We make them come to us on our ground. Snake, back room, you have 30 minutes. Hound, nobody moves outside without my word. He looked at Frankie. Keep it quiet. I don't want them to know how many of us are here. Frankie nodded and moved. Bear turned back to Lena. She was still watching him with those steady, dark eyes that her mother had apparently aimed at the world and passed to her daughter intact. You ever been in a situation where someone told you to trust them and you didn't know yet if you should? Bear asked her. Yes, she said immediately. What did you do? She thought about it for a half second. I looked at what they did, not what they said. Bear almost smiled. Almost. Then keep watching, he said, and stay away from the windows. Was. The argument started 20 minutes later, and it started with Dex Riley. Hound was Bear's oldest friend in the club. They'd known each other before the Reapers existed, back when they were both 20-something veterans trying to figure out what their lives meant in a country that had finished needing them. Hound was loyal, the way Stone is loyal. He didn't move easily, but when he committed to a position, you needed more than argument to shift him. Tonight, his position was the problem. He cornered Bear in the hallway between the main room and the back office, away from the others, and he did it without raising his voice, which was always the sign that Hound was being serious rather than just heated. "This is a mistake," Hound said. "Tell me something I don't know," Bear said. "I mean keeping her here, taking this on." Hound looked at him flat. "Bear, think about what we're doing. We don't know who those people are outside. We don't know what's in that bullet. We don't know if Ghost is alive or dead or something in between, and we don't know that girl. She came to us. That's not a reason. Her mother sent her. Also not a reason." Hound's voice stayed even, but there was something in it. Not coldness. Bear knew better than that. Hound didn't run cold. He ran careful. "We have 20 men in there. We have families some of those men go home to. We have a truce with the county that took 7 years to build and will take 5 minutes to destroy if those people outside decide we're harboring something that belongs to them." Bear leaned against the hallway wall. The plank behind him creaked. He could feel the cold coming through from outside, seeping through the old wood. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Bear said. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." Bear looked at him. "And I know why you're saying it, and I know you're not wrong about the risk." He paused. "But Hound, that bullet." Hound was quiet. "Those markings," Bear said. "You saw them same as I did. Ghost made that 10 years ago. He hit it with the one person he trusted with it, and he told that person, told a dying woman, to send her daughter here. Not to the county, not to a lawyer. Here." Bear looked at the wall like he could see through it to the main room, to the girl sitting at the bar. "Ghost is telling us something, and whatever it is, those people in those SUVs want to make sure it never gets said." Hound rubbed his jaw. The sound of his hand against the stubble was loud in the narrow hallway. "You're letting the past make the decision," he said. "You feel like we failed him, so you want to fix it through her." Bear didn't answer. That was in its particular way an answer. "Bear, I know," Bear said. "I know that's part of it." He pushed off the wall. "That doesn't make it wrong." He walked back toward the main room, and Hound stood in the hallway for a moment longer, alone, looking at nothing in particular, his jaw still tight. The knock on the front door came at 9:47. Not a bang, not a pounding. A professional knock, the kind that says, "We know you're in there, we know you know we're here, let's dispense with the theater." Every man in the room held his position. Bear walked to the door alone. He opened it. The man on the other side was tall, 6'2" perhaps, in a dark jacket that was good quality and not trying to hide the fact. Short hair, pale eyes that were doing the same thing to Bear that Bear's eyes were doing to him, reading, cataloging, assessing. He was holding up a case containing identification, and Bear looked at it without leaning forward, without indicating whether it impressed him. "Mr. Maddox," the man said. "My name is Harlan Voss. We're with the Federal Asset Recovery Division." He said it with the smooth efficiency of a man who had said it many times, in many doorways, in front of many different expressions. "We believe you may have had contact tonight with a minor who is the subject of an open welfare investigation." Bear looked at him. He looked at the badge. He looked back at Voss. "Welfare investigation," Bear said. "The child's mother passed away recently. There are concerns about the welfare and placement of the minor." Voss's voice was cooperative in the way that suggests cooperation is a courtesy he is extending and can withdraw. "We'd like to speak with her, make sure she's safe." "Federal Asset Recovery," Bear said. "What assets are you recovering?" A very slight pause. "The division handles a range of sensitive matters related to federal interests." "Never heard of it," Bear said. "We're a relatively new department." "Uh-huh." Bear rested one hand on the doorframe. "You got a card?" Voss reached into his jacket and produced a card. Bear took it without looking at it. "It's late," Bear said. "Anybody who comes through this door in this weather, we give them somewhere to sit and get warm. That's a standing policy." He met Voss's eyes. "That include children who knock on doors looking for help?" "Mr. Maddox, we're going to need to verify your credentials before anyone goes anywhere," Bear said. "That's also a standing policy. You understand, we're careful people." He said it pleasantly, the way a man says something pleasant that means something else entirely. "We'll be in touch in the morning, Mr. Voss, once we've had time to look into your division." He closed the door. He stood with his back to it for a moment. His hand was pressed flat against the wood, and he was listening to the footsteps on the porch, how they paused, the specific weight of a pause that contains a decision being made, and then moved back toward the vehicles. He exhaled. "Federal Asset Recovery Division," Snake said from the back. He was already typing. Doesn't exist. There's no such division registered in any federal directory I have access to. He looked up. The badge design uses the standard DOJ format, but the division header is wrong. The font weight on the department name is different from any legitimate credential I've ever processed. So they're not federal, Frankie said. They're using federal aesthetics, Snake said. It's not the same thing. He turned the laptop around. The card has a phone number. Area code is DC, but the number traces to a private VoIP service registered in Delaware under a shell company. He paused. A shell company that, based on the registration chain, connects to a parent corporation called Meridian Strategic Solutions. The name sat in the air for a moment. Hound was the first one to react. Not much, just a quality of stillness that was different from his usual stillness. His shoulders dropped 1 millimeter, which on Hound meant something significant. Meridian, he said. It came out flat and careful, like a word he was handling with gloves. Bear looked at him. You know it? I've heard it. Hound moved to the window, looked out through the gap in the curtain at the 3 SUVs. 3 years ago, I was helping Denny Crane. You remember Denny? The ex-ranger from the Veterans Support Group in Clover Junction. I was helping him deal with a situation where his pension benefits had been clawed back by the VA. Some administrative error, they said. Except it wasn't an error. A woman at the support group, she was a former JAG paralegal, she started pulling threads. The paperwork pointed back to a contractor. He paused. Meridian Strategic Solutions. They'd been embedded in the VA's contracting office for 4 years. They were moving money. The room was quiet. How much money? Bear asked. Enough that when the JAG paralegal got too close, she stopped showing up to the support group, Hound said. Denny tried to follow up. Got a visit from 2 men in expensive jackets who told him it would be in his best interest to let the matter rest. He turned back from the window. Ghost disappeared 10 years ago, Hound said. It wasn't a new statement. It was a calculation. Snake's fingers had stopped moving on the keyboard. He was looking at the bullet in his other hand with an expression that had gone from focus to something quieter and harder to read. Bear, Snake said. Yeah. I've got it. He set the bullet down carefully. The cipher. I've got the message. Every person in the room oriented toward him. Snake looked at the screen for a moment, then up. Ghost found them, he said. 10 years ago. That's what the message says. He found Meridian inside the federal veteran contracting system. He had documentation. He had names, numbers, account trails. He stopped. He was going to bring it to a federal investigator he trusted, someone outside the compromised departments. But before he could, they framed him, Bear said. They framed him, Snake confirmed. And the documentation he'd collected, the evidence, he hid it. He looked at the bullet. The message says he split the evidence across 3 locations. The bullet tells us the first one. The quiet that followed was the kind that happens when everyone in a room understands simultaneously that the world has just changed shape. How much evidence? Frankie asked. Enough, Snake said, based on what he described in the code. Account ledgers, falsified contracts, names of officials, a trail going back 8 years before he disappeared. If this is real, if it survived, it's enough to bring down an entire network of people who've been stealing from veterans for close to 2 decades. Lena had been silent through all of it. Now she spoke. Is that why they killed my mother? The question went into the room like a stone into still water. Bear turned to her. She hadn't moved from the bar stool. The mug of coffee was cold in her hands. Her face was 10 years old, and it had, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, absorbed the shape of something no 10-year-old face should have to hold. Your mother, Snake said carefully, was she ever involved in any kind of legal proceedings? Any federal matters? Did she ever mention, she worked at a diner, Lena said. She woke up at 4:30 every morning and she worked at a diner. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was working to stay underneath it. She didn't get involved in things. She kept her head down because she knew what happened to people who didn't. She looked at Snake. But she kept the bullet. For 10 years she kept it, and she didn't say anything to anyone, not even to me. Not until she was dying. She was protecting you, Bear said. I know that, Lena said. I know that's what she was doing. She set down the mug. The small sound of ceramic on the bar surface was very loud in the quiet room. I want to know if that's why she's dead. No one answered right away. Because the answer was probably yes, and saying probably yes to a 10-year-old girl in a room full of men who had seen enough of the world to know what probably yes meant. That required something. A moment, at least. We don't know yet, Bear said finally, but we're going to find out. It was the truest thing he could say. He watched her take it in, watched her decide whether it was enough to hold on to for right now, watched her decide that it had to be. Outside, one of the SUVs moved. Not far, repositioning, sliding 20 feet to the left to cover the gap between the front of the building and the side entrance, smooth, coordinated, unhurried, tightening the perimeter. They're not leaving, Hound said from the window. No, Bear said. They're going to wait for us to make a mistake. Then we don't make one. We already made one, Snake said quietly. Bear looked at him. Snake had his eyes on the laptop, but his voice was flat in the way that meant what he was about to say was going to matter. The frequency spike I flagged 3 weeks ago, he said. I've been running it backward, trying to find the origin point. He turned the laptop. It wasn't them tracking her here tonight. It was them tracking this location for weeks. They already knew the bullet existed. They already knew Carmen Alvarez had it. They were watching her. He paused. They let her die. They waited until she was gone, and then they were going to take the girl before she could give the bullet to anyone. She got out first, Bear said. She got out first, Snake said. But Bear, they've been monitoring our communication frequencies for 3 weeks, which means they may already know what I've decoded. The implications of that arranged themselves in the room like furniture being moved into new positions, everything suddenly in a different place than it was before, the space feeling wrong, the exits and windows suddenly carrying a different meaning. We have to move, Frankie said. We can't move, Hound said. 3 vehicles, 12 minimum outside, they'll follow. We move smart, Bear said. Not all at once, not through the front. He looked at Snake. The location in the bullet, first cache. How far? Snake told him. Bear absorbed it. That's a 6-hour ride under normal conditions. These aren't normal conditions, Hound said. No, Bear said. They're not. He stood still for a moment, in the middle of the room, in the neon light, the red and the blue falling across his face at odd angles, making him look like something out of an old photograph, the kind of photograph that captures people in the moment before everything changes. We hold tonight. We keep Lena inside, away from windows, and we hold tonight. At first light, before they can get county cooperation for any kind of forced entry, we split. 2 groups, different routes. He looked at the room. And we find what Ghost left. And if what he left isn't there anymore, someone in the back said. Reno, the youngest member. He didn't say it as a challenge. It was a real question, and the room acknowledged it as such by going quiet. Then we figure out the next step from there, Bear said. Same as we always do. It wasn't a rousing speech. Bear didn't make rousing speeches. He stated facts and directions and trusted his brothers to fill in the rest themselves, because they were men who had spent their lives filling in the rest themselves. The room moved. Not loud, not fast. Deliberate, disciplined. Men taking positions. The quiet choreography of people who know their roles without having to be told twice. Lena slid off the bar stool. She walked to where Bear was standing and stopped in front of him. She was small enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at his face, and she did it without any apparent self-consciousness about the size difference. I have something else, she said. Bear looked at her. She reached into the front pocket of the oversized hoodie, pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft with handling, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. She held it out. Bear took it, unfolded it. It was a photograph. Old, slightly faded. The color shifted toward yellow the way photographs from 15 or more years ago sometimes did. 2 people. A woman Bear didn't recognize, young, dark-haired, smiling at something outside the frame. And a man. The man Bear recognized. It was Ghost, younger by years. No scars on the left side of his neck that he'd have gotten in the years after. But it was Ghost. The jaw, the eyes, the way he held himself even in a casual photograph. Straight, contained, like a man who never fully switched off. And he was looking at the woman beside him with an expression Bear had never seen on Ghost's face in all the years they'd ridden together. My mother kept it in her Bible, Lena said. She kept it under the back cover. She thought I didn't know it was there. Bear looked at the photograph for a long moment. He looked at Ghost's face, at the way Ghost looked at this woman, at the fact that this photograph existed at all, that Ghost had stood close enough to Carmen Alvarez for someone to capture them both in the same frame, that they had both been young and unscared and looking at something outside the frame together. He looked at Lana. He looked at the photograph again. The shape of certain things was becoming clear. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to understand that Ghost's disappearance had not been only about evidence and corruption and a federal frame-up. It had been about something smaller and more permanent than any of that. "Does anyone else know you have this?" Bear asked. "No," Lena said. "Just me." A pause. "And now you." Bear folded the photograph, held it for a moment, then handed it back to her. "Keep it," he said. "Keep it close." She tucked it back into the hoodie pocket with the careful precision of someone protecting something irreplaceable. And then, from outside, a sound broke the night that made every person in the room stop moving at the same time. The single Harley engine that Bear had heard 40 minutes ago, the one running dark on the fire road behind the tree line, had stopped. Somewhere very close. Somewhere on foot. And then, at the back of the building, 3 measured knocks on the delivery door. Not the professional knock of Harlan Voss. Something different. A pattern. 3 knocks. 2. 1. The specific sequence that the Iron Reapers had used among themselves as an all-clear signal since the club's 2nd year. A sequence that had never been written down. A sequence that only a full patch member would know. Bear and Hound looked at each other across the room, and for the first time in 10 years, both of their faces held the exact same expression. Something between hope and terror, and no clear way yet to know which one was right. Bear moved first. He crossed the main room in 8 strides, and the men parted for him without being asked, reading his direction and his speed and the set of his jaw and understanding from those 3 things alone that this was not a moment for questions. Frankie fell in behind him. Hound was already at the back corridor before Bear reached it, moving with the controlled urgency of a man who had spent decades learning the difference between speed and haste. The delivery door was steel, set into the back wall of the building behind the storage room, the kind of door that had been installed by a previous owner for practical reasons and repurposed by the Reapers as a secondary exit. It had 3 deadbolts. All 3 were currently engaged. The knocks came again. 3. 2. 1. Same pattern. Same cadence. Bear stood in front of the door and put his hand flat against the steel and felt the cold coming through it from outside. His other hand was at his side, open, not reaching for anything yet. "Talk," he said, loud enough to carry through the door. Silence for a moment. The rain against the roof. Then a voice, low, roughened at the edges. The particular texture of a voice that had been used very little for a very long time. "Bear, it's me." 3 words, that was all. Bear closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Hound made a sound behind him. Not a word, just air moving through his nose in a way that expressed something he had no language for. Bear threw the deadbolts. All 3, one after another, the mechanical sound of each one filling the narrow corridor. He pulled the door open. The man on the other side came in with the cold and the rain, and 10 years of absence packed around him like a second skin. Elias Ghost. Navarro was 44 years old, and he looked like a man who had spent 10 years surviving rather than living. He was lean in a way that went past fit into something more Spartan, whittled down, stripped of everything that wasn't essential. His hair was longer than Bear remembered, dark and wet from the rain, pushed back off his forehead. The scar on his neck that hadn't been there in the photograph Lena carried was there now, running from just below his left ear to the collar of his jacket. A pale, healed line that spoke of something that had come very close to being the end of him. His jacket was old black leather, unmarked. No club colors, no patches. He'd ridden without them for 10 years. He was looking at Bear with eyes that held the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed a moment in his mind so many times that when the moment actually arrives, the rehearsal doesn't help at all. Bear looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back to let him in and closed the door behind him. The room reacted to Ghost, the way rooms react to the return of something that had been grieved, not with celebration, not immediately, but with a stunned reorientation, every person present having to revise their map of the world to accommodate a thing they had stopped expecting. Some of the older members, men who had ridden with Ghost, who had sat at the same tables and shared the same fire roads and carried the weight of his absence for a decade, went very still. Not frozen, not shocked exactly. Still. The specific stillness of men whose emotional systems were processing faster than they could express. Reno, 26, who had joined the club 3 years after Ghost disappeared and knew him only as a name and a legend attached to that name, looked between the returned man and the older members' faces and understood from those faces alone that what had just walked through the door was significant. Ghost stood in the middle of the main room and looked at the assembled men. And then his eyes found Lena. She was at the bar where Bear had left her, still in the oversized hoodie, and she had gone very still in her own way. Different from the men's stillness. More careful, more controlled. The stillness of someone who had been preparing for a moment and wasn't certain she'd prepared correctly. Ghost looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. Something moved across his face. Not one thing, several things in fast succession, crossing his features the way weather crosses open country. Recognition. Something close to pain. Something else that didn't have a clean name. "Lena," he said. She didn't answer right away. She was looking at his face with the photograph comparison expression of a child trying to match a real person to a picture they've carried in their mind for a long time. "You look different from the photo," she said finally. "Yeah," Ghost said. "I know. Older. 10 years will do it." She looked at him for another moment. "Are you my father?" The room was completely silent. Ghost moved to the bar. He sat on the stool 2 down from her, and he put his hands on the bar surface and looked at them for a moment. At the knuckles, the scars, the hands of a man who'd spent his adult life in service of violence in one form or another. And then he looked at Lena. "Yes," he said. The word cost him something visible, but he said it straight, without flinching, without qualifying it or softening it or surrounding it with architecture designed to make it easier to hear. Lena absorbed it. She didn't cry. She sat with it and turned it over the way she'd been doing with everything since she walked through the door, with that quality of careful, methodical composure that was already bearing more weight than it should have had to. "Why weren't you there?" she asked. "To protect you," Ghost said. "That's what everyone says," Lena said. "When they leave. They say it's to protect you." She looked at him directly. "Did it work?" Ghost held her gaze. "You're here," he said. "You're alive. You made it here." "My mom isn't," Lena said. The sentence sat between them. Ghost's jaw tightened, his hands on the bar surface pressed flat, the knuckles going slightly pale. He breathed through his nose, once, controlled. "I know," he said. "I know she isn't." Bear was watching this from across the room, and there was something in Ghost's face that he couldn't yet read. Not just grief, not just guilt. Something underneath those things that felt like information. "Ghost," Bear said. "How long have you been in the county?" Ghost's eyes came up to him. 3 days. "You were here when Carmen died." A pause. "Yes." "Did you see her?" Another pause, longer. "No," he said. "I couldn't get close enough. They were already watching the apartment." He stopped. "I watched them watch her. I couldn't do anything." 3 days? Hound said from across the room. His voice had an edge to it now that hadn't been there before. "You've been 3 days in the county, and you came to us tonight. Why tonight? Why not 3 days ago?" Ghost looked at him. "Because 3 days ago I didn't know they'd already broken the second cache." The shift in the room was immediate and physical. A tightening, a collective forward lean, the way men move when something they thought they understood just changed shape. "What second cache?" Snake said. Ghost reached into his jacket and produced a phone, a burner, the kind with no registration, and unlocked it and placed it on the bar facing Snake. Snake moved to it immediately, reading what was on the screen, and his face did the thing it almost never did. It went slack. "Where did you get this?" Snake said. "Took it off one of Meridian's field operatives 2 days ago," Ghost said. "Outside Millhaven." "You took it off? He's not going to miss it," Ghost said flatly, and didn't elaborate. Snake turned the phone so Bear could see the screen. It was a file. Internal document, Meridian Strategic Solutions letterhead. The same company Snake had traced from Voss's card. The document was a mission status report, and the relevant section was midway down the page, under an operational heading that read Archive Recovery. Cache 2. Recovered. Contents transferred to Secure Facility 0109. Original location sanitized. Cache 1. Active pursuit. Estimated retrieval window 48 hours pending asset acquisition. Asset acquisition. Bear looked up from the phone. He looked at Lena. Ghost was already watching him look at Lena. They found the second cache, Bear said. They've had it for 3 weeks, Ghost said, which means whatever I split across the 3 locations, they have a third of it. The first cache still exists, but the window to reach it is closing. And the third cache... He stopped. What about the third cache? Snake said. Ghost was quiet for a moment. He looked at the phone on the bar. The third cache isn't a location, he said. It's a person. The room waited. There's a witness, Ghost said. Someone who was inside Meridian's contracting operation. Someone who helped me build the documentation before I was framed. I got them out before they could be targeted, and I hid them the same way I hid the physical evidence. He looked at Bear. The 3 pieces only work together. The documents, the location data, and the witness testimony. Any 2 without the third can be contested, discredited, made to disappear. He paused. All 3 together is enough to put Meridian's executive structure away for the rest of their lives and expose every official they own. And Meridian knows this, Hound said. Meridian has always known this, Ghost said. It's why the frame was so thorough. It's why they've spent 10 years trying to find me. He looked at the room. And it's why tonight, when I saw their vehicles pull up outside, I understood that something had changed. They weren't watching anymore. They'd moved to active recovery. His eyes went to Lena, which meant she'd given them a reason to move. She led them here, Hound said. She didn't lead them anywhere, Ghost said, and his voice carried a very quiet warning in it. They were already coming. She just accelerated the timeline. Hound looked at Ghost for a long moment. There was something between the 2 men, old, layered, the specific complexity of people who had been close and had been separated by something that neither of them had chosen, and both of them had been altered by. You should have contacted us, Hound said. 3 days ago, a year ago, any year in the last 10, and brought Meridian directly to this door, Ghost said. We could have handled it. With what? Good intentions? Ghost's voice stayed level, but the temperature in it dropped. Hound, I watched them destroy a decorated Marine veteran's life in 6 weeks, using people on the inside of federal law enforcement and a paper trail so clean it convinced a jury in 4 hours. They don't fight the way we fight. They fight with the system as their weapon. Every connection you tried to pull, every lawyer you called, every official inquiry you made, they would have known about it before the call was finished. So instead you disappeared for 10 years and left us. I left you alive, Ghost said. That was the only thing I could do for you. The silence that followed was the kind that exists between 2 people who are both right and both know it, and can't find anywhere to put that knowledge that doesn't hurt. Bear broke it. The witness, he said. Who is it? Where? Ghost looked at him. He seemed to be making a decision. The last calculation before releasing the information he'd been protecting the longest. Her name is Vera Mack, he said. She was Meridian's internal contracts auditor. She had full access to the ledger system, the falsified disbursements, the names of every official on their payroll. He paused. She's been living under a different name in a town called Trestle Junction for 9 years. She's safe. Or she was. Was, Snake said. Was, Ghost confirmed. 3 days ago, the monitoring system I set up around her location registered a disruption, the kind that happens when someone starts asking questions in the vicinity, the kind that precedes a visit. He looked at Bear. If Meridian has the second cache and they've moved to active recovery, they're going to Vera. If they get to her before we do, the witness is gone, Bear said, and with her, the only piece of the evidence structure that can't be replicated or rebuilt, Ghost said. The documents prove the theft. The location data proves the cover-up. But Vera was inside. She was there. She can name names that aren't anywhere in writing. He stopped. They know that. They've always known that. Snake was already at his laptop. Trestle Junction, that's 4 hours northwest, Ghost said, under normal writing conditions. Current conditions aren't normal, Frankie said from the corner. No, Ghost agreed. Bear looked at the front of the building, through the wall, through the door, to where 3 black SUVs sat in the rain with their patient engines running and their 12 or more occupants waiting for a mistake. "We can't get out through the front," Hound said. "No," Bear said. "Fire road," Ghost said. "The way I came in. They haven't covered it. I checked the perimeter twice before I knocked. They don't know it exists." "They will soon," Snake said. "If they have our communication frequencies." "They have what I let them have," Ghost said. Snake looked up. "What?" "3 weeks ago I identified the tap on your frequency," Ghost said. "I've been feeding it selective information since then. What they think they know about this club's movements and communication channels is what I wanted them to think." A pause. "But that window is closing. Once Voss realizes the information he's been receiving doesn't match what's happening on the ground." "How long?" Bear said. "Hours," Ghost said. "Maybe less." Bear turned to the room. The men were watching him, not waiting to be told what to feel. They'd sorted that out already, each of them, in the internal quiet of men who process things without display. They were waiting to be told what to do, which was a different thing, and which was a thing Bear had been giving them for 14 years. "We split into 3 groups," Bear said. "First group, 6 men, Frankie leading, stays here. Hold the position. Make noise. Make it sound like the full club is present. Don't engage Voss unless they breach the door, and if they breach, you make it cost them." He looked at Frankie. "Can you hold it?" "Long enough," Frankie said. Second group, Hound, 4 men, takes the county roads east. Make it visible. Draw whatever eyes are mobile. He looked at Hound. "Keep them busy." "And the third group?" Hound said. "Ghost, Snake, Lena, and me," Bear said. "Fire road, northwest." He looked at Ghost. "You ride point. You know that road." Ghost nodded once. "What about the girl?" someone said from the back. Renault, again, not challenging, genuinely uncertain about the answer. "She goes with you into this?" Bear looked at Lena. Lena looked at him. "They know she exists," Bear said. "If she stays here and Meridian breaches, she's what they came for. If she goes with Hound's group and they're followed," he stopped. "She stays with us. Where we can see her." He looked at Reno. "She's safer moving than she is sitting still." Ghost was watching this exchange with something in his face that was close to pain. The pain of a parent who has spent 10 years making decisions to protect a child and is now watching someone else make those decisions and understanding, with a clarity that landed somewhere deep, that the someone else was doing it right. "When?" Frankie asked. 20 minutes, Bear said. "We need to move before Voss recalibrates." The room scattered into motion. 14 minutes later, in the storage room at the back of the clubhouse, Ghost sat on an overturned crate and watched Lena standing 3 feet away looking at a rack of old club merchandise, leather patches, pins, a faded photograph someone had tacked to the wall showing 20 or so men on motorcycles in a parking lot somewhere, all of them younger, all of them looking at the camera with the combination of pride and defiance that marked the photograph as belonging to an earlier era. She wasn't really looking at any of it. She was standing somewhere in her mind, working through things. Ghost watched her. He had a cigarette in his hand that he'd been given by Reno and hadn't lit. He turned it in his fingers instead. "I used to think about what I'd say," he said. "When I saw you." She turned her head slightly but didn't look at him directly. "What did you come up with?" "Nothing good," he said. Everything I thought of sounded like an excuse. She turned fully now. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at Bear and Snake and Hound, reading, calibrating, measuring the distance between what was said and what was meant. 10 years old, and she had that look. Carmen had given it to her, he thought. Carmen had always had it. "Were you in love with her?" Lena asked. "My mom." Ghost held the unlit cigarette still. "Yeah," he said. "I was." "She never said that," Lena said. "About you. She said you were someone important, someone she trusted." A beat. "She didn't say love." "Maybe she was protecting you from that too," Ghost said. Lena considered this. "Or maybe it was complicated." Ghost exhaled. "Yeah," he said. "It was complicated." She looked at him for a moment longer, then looked back at the photograph on the wall. "The men here," she said. "They're angry at you, some of them. They have the right." "Hound is," she said. He didn't say it, but I can see it. He's angry and he thinks you should have trusted them. He's not wrong, Ghost said. But you didn't. No. Because you thought they'd get hurt. Because I knew they would, Ghost said. Meridian doesn't leave loose threads. If I'd contacted the club, any contact, any kind, they would have been targeted. Their families, their businesses, the truce they'd built with the county. He paused. I couldn't do that to them. But you could do it to us, Lena said. To me and my mom. You could leave us. The sentence was not a dagger. It wasn't thrown. She said it with the quiet, measured precision of a child who is saying the true thing rather than the sharp thing, and that made it land somewhere different than anger would have. Ghost put the unlit cigarette on the crate beside him. He looked at his hands. Yes, he said. I could. Because you were hidden. Because Carmen knew how to be invisible. Because you were the one thing they didn't know about. He stopped. Connecting to you would have made you visible. We were invisible and she still died, Lena said. Ghost said nothing. She got sick, Lena said. That's why she died, not Meridian, not them. She just got sick and the insurance wasn't enough and the doctors weren't close enough and she stopped. She pulled in a breath through her nose, held it, released it. She died because of ordinary things, not because of any of this. Ghost looked at her. I know, he said quietly. I know she did. So all of it, Lena said, all the hiding, all the years, and in the end it was just… She stopped again. Something moved across her face. The composure trembled once, and she held it. It was ordinary. Ghost got off the crate. He crossed the 3 feet between them, and he crouched down in front of her, the same way Bear had done, the same posture. Men trying to get to her level, to her eye line, to make themselves small enough to meet her where she was. Lena, he said. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. The leaving, the distance, the years. He held her gaze. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't give back what you didn't have. I know you know, she said. He stopped. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, she said. Because it isn't, but… She looked at him with something that was not forgiveness yet, and not unforgiveness either. Something in between that was perhaps more honest than either. I came looking for you. I walked 7 miles in the rain looking for you. She paused. That means something. Ghost held very still. Figure out what, she said. Does it? Bear found Snake in the back office at the 13-minute mark, and the expression on Snake's face when he looked up from the laptop was one Bear had learned over 16 years to treat as a serious indicator. Talk, Bear said. I've been running the Meridian corporate structure since Ghost brought the phone, Snake said. The shell companies, the board names, the contracting registrations. He turned the laptop. Bear. This goes higher than a contracting fraud operation. Bear looked at the screen. Names. Organizational charts. Dates. How much higher? He said. Meridian has a sitting federal judge on their ledger, Snake said. A current senator from this state whose campaign received 8 years of laundered contributions. And… He stopped. He pointed to a name at the top of a chain of subsidiaries, the operational director of the division that framed Ghost. Bear read the name. He read it again. That's not possible, he said. It's documented, Snake said. Ghost's original evidence, combined with what's on this phone. Bear, the man who signed off on Ghost's arrest warrant, who oversaw the entire frame-up operation, who personally authorized the falsified evidence chain, was being paid by Meridian, Bear said. Has been on their payroll for 12 years, Snake said, since 2 years before Ghost was arrested. He looked at Bear. This wasn't just corruption. This was orchestrated. They identified Ghost as a threat, they inserted the operative, they built the case from the inside. He paused. And the man who built it is still in his position. He was promoted twice in the years since. Bear put both hands on the desk, looked at the screen. If Meridian gets the witness, Snake said, and burns the first cash before we reach it, this man never faces any of it. He continues. The whole operation continues. He paused. And everyone who knows what's in that bullet… He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Bear straightened up. He looked at the door. He looked at the ceiling, at the single bulb in the office that had been flickering for months, and nobody had gotten around to replacing. We go now, he said. 12 minutes. Bear. Snake's voice stopped him at the door. There's something else. Bear waited. Snake looked at the screen for a moment, then up. The witness. Vera Mack. He paused. I cross-referenced her name through the Meridian document chain. He stopped. She's not just an auditor who helped Ghost from the inside. Her real name, her original name before Ghost relocated her, is Vera Caruso. He stopped again. She's the sister of one of our members. The sound of the rain on the roof. The distant sound of the SUV engines outside. Bear looked at Snake. Which member? Bear said, and the question came out with a weight in it that already suspected the answer was going to change something that couldn't be unchanged. Snake turned the laptop screen to face him. Bear looked at the name. And in the main room, through the closed door, that member's voice could be heard, moving, talking, preparing to ride, completely unaware that 10 years of buried history had just detonated silently in a back office, and that when Bear came back through that door, nothing between them would ever be exactly the same again. Bear came through the office door, and the member whose name was on Snake's screen was Dex Riley, Hound. Bear walked back into the main room and looked at the man he had known for 30 years. The man who had brought Ghost into the club. The man who had argued 20 minutes ago for sending Lena away. The man who had been angrier than anyone else in the room at Ghost's return. And he looked at him the way you look at someone when you are deciding, in real time, whether the person you thought they were and the person they might actually be can coexist in the same moment. Hound was pulling on his riding gloves. He had his jacket zipped, his helmet under one arm, the focused preparation of a man getting ready to ride hard in bad weather. He looked up and met Bear's eyes across the room. He read Bear's face immediately. Hound had always been able to read Bear's face. He went still, checking gear, low conversations about routes and timing. And for a moment it was just the two of them, 20 feet apart, and the question sitting in the air between them like something with physical weight. Bear, Hound said, low. Just his name. Bear crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from Hound and he spoke quietly, underneath the general noise of the room, which was not because he wanted privacy, but because he was not ready yet for what the volume of the conversation would mean. Vera Mack, Bear said. Something happened in Hound's face. Not guilt, not the specific look of a man who has done something wrong. Something older and harder than guilt. Something that had been sitting behind his eyes for a long time, compressed into a small space, and now at the sound of that name, it shifted. Where did you hear that name? Hound said. Meridian's operational files, Bear said. Ghost took a phone off one of their field operatives. He watched Hound's face. Snake ran the name through the document chain. Vera Mack's original name is Vera Caruso. He paused. Your sister has been living under a false identity in Trestle Junction for 9 years. Hound looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the floor. Dex, Bear said, and it was the first time in years he'd used the man's actual name. And the weight of it, the deliberateness of it, turned Hound's eyes back up to his. She came to me, Hound said, 8 months before Ghost was arrested. She'd found something in the contract she was auditing. She didn't know what she had yet, not the full picture, but she was scared and she came to me. He stopped. I introduced her to Ghost. I thought he'd know what to do with it, what she'd found. You knew about the evidence. I knew about Vera finding something, Hound said. I didn't know what Ghost was building from it until after he was arrested, after he was gone. His jaw tightened. By then Vera was already under. Ghost had moved her before they took him. I didn't know where. He protected her location even from me. But you knew she was alive, Bear said. All this time. I knew she existed, Hound said. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know what she had. He looked at Bear directly. I should have told you. I know I should have told you, but telling you meant making you a target, and Ghost had made it clear before he disappeared. Don't, Bear said. Hound stopped. Don't give me the same reason, Bear said. I've heard it twice tonight already, and it doesn't get easier to swallow. The two men stood with 30 years of loyalty between them, and the specific crack that appears in 30 years of loyalty when the truth finally surfaces through it. Not a break. Bear was not prepared to call it a break yet, but a crack. Something that would require attention, later, when there was a later. She's in danger, Bear said. Right now, tonight. I know, Hound said. Then we table this, Bear said, and you ride. Hound put his helmet on. They left through the fire road in two groups within 45 seconds of each other. Ghost went first on his unmarked Harley, no lights, moving through the darkness behind the tree line with the particular ease of a man who had spent 10 years riding roads that weren't supposed to be there. Bear followed on his own machine with Lena behind him. He'd strapped her in with a riding belt improvised from 2 lengths of cargo strap, her arms around his torso, her face pressed against the back of his jacket, the small but measurable weight of her behind him on the seat, the most specific and concrete responsibility he had ever carried on a motorcycle. Snake came third, laptop bag sealed in waterproof canvas across his back. Behind them, inside the clubhouse, Frankie Dunn and 5 members held the perimeter, the sounds of the full club maintained through movement and noise, and the particular discipline of men performing normalcy under pressure. And behind them, on the county roads east, Hound led 4 riders into the kind of visible, deliberate movement designed to pull eyes and attention and the patient vehicles of Harlan Voss away from a fire road that officially didn't exist. The rain had dropped to a cold drizzle that felt like needles against exposed skin. The temperature was somewhere in the low 30s. The fire road was dirt and gravel, rutted from the rain, and the motorcycles moved through it with the careful, controlled speed of riders who were prioritizing survival over pace. Ghost set the speed and Bear matched it. They rode in silence. Lena's grip around Bear's torso was tight and consistent, not panicked, not white-knuckling. The grip of someone who had decided to hold on and was doing it with full commitment. Occasionally, when the road roughened or the bike shifted, her grip tightened for a second and then released back to its baseline, and Bear found that rhythm, the tightening and releasing, oddly clarifying, something to anchor against. They hit the county road at the northern end of the fire road, and Ghost accelerated without warning, the Harley's engine opening up into the cold black air, and Bear matched him, and for a few minutes the road was theirs. Straight, dark, the yellow line in the headlight, the trees on both sides throwing the engine sound back at them, and nothing behind them that wasn't supposed to be there. 20 miles out, Ghost signaled and pulled into the lot of a closed gas station. They stopped. Bear killed his engine. Ghost killed his. The sudden silence was enormous. "Clear so far," Ghost said. Steam from his breath. "But we have maybe 90 minutes before Voss gets mobile. Once he confirms the clubhouse is a shell." "He'll triangulate," Snake said. He had his phone out, a secondary device he'd been using to monitor the frequency. "I'm watching the signal. It's been quiet since we left." He looked up. Too quiet. "What does that mean?" Bear said. "It means they stopped transmitting," Snake said, "which either means they know we're listening and they've gone dark," he paused, "or they've already moved." Ghost looked at the road north. His profile in the darkness was all angles and stillness. "How far ahead is Trestle Junction?" 3 hours at pace," Snake said. 240 if we push it." "We push it," Ghost said. Bear looked at Lena. She was off the bike, standing on the wet asphalt, her breath coming out in small clouds. She had her arms crossed over her chest. Not hugging herself, just contained, conserving warmth. Her shoes, still slightly damp from the original rain, were going to be soaked through again before this was over. Bear went to his saddlebag, produced a pair of wool socks he kept there, riding habit, long-standing, and held them out to her. She looked at them, then at him. She took them without comment, sat on the gas station curb, removed her shoes and the ruined socks beneath them, and put on Bear's. They went most of the way up her calves. She put her shoes back on, stood up, and looked at him like something had been decided. They rode north. Trestle Junction was the kind of town that exists in the folds between larger places. 500 people, a grain elevator, 2 churches, a diner that doubled as the town's social infrastructure. The kind of town where everyone knew which cars belonged and which ones didn't, and where a stranger asking questions at the wrong time of night was noticed by people who had nothing to do but notice things. Ghost knew the town. He'd set up Vera's relocation himself, 9 years ago, found the rental house on the east edge of town, established the false identity through channels he'd built during his Marine years, done the work of making Vera Mack into someone who had always lived quietly and kept to herself and gave no one a reason to look twice. He'd visited twice in 9 years. Both times undercover, both times brief. Both times leaving before the connection between him and the quiet woman on the east side of town could solidify into something observable. The monitoring system he'd rigged around the property was simple. Motion sensors on the approach roads, a signal transmitter disguised as a utility box on the corner, relaying to a frequency he checked with a secondary device every 48 hours. 3 days ago, the frequency had gone wrong. Not silent, wrong. An irregular signal pattern that could mean any of three things: equipment malfunction, wildlife disturbance, or human presence in the monitored zone. He hadn't been able to get close enough to determine which. They came into Trestle Junction from the south at 12:41 in the morning, lights off, coasting the last quarter mile with engines low. Ghost led them off the main road onto a parallel dirt track that ran behind the grain elevator, and they stopped 200 yards from the back of a property that looked, in the darkness, completely ordinary. A small house, single story, white siding, a light on in the back room. Just one, the amber quality of a lamp rather than overhead lighting. Ghost sat on his bike and looked at it for a long moment. "The light," Bear said quietly. "She leaves the front dark," Ghost said. "Backlight means she's up. Normal pattern." He paused. "But she doesn't know we're coming, and it's after midnight." "Could be insomnia," Snake said. "Could be," Ghost said. He got off the bike. "I go first," Bear said. Ghost looked at him. "You've been running alone for 10 years, Bear said. "That's over. I go first." Something in Ghost's face moved. Not resistance, not gratitude either. Something more complicated than both. He stepped back. Bear went first. He crossed the 200 yards in the darkness, staying close to the fence line, his boots finding the soft ground between the gravel patches without sound. The drizzle had picked back up. Light, cold, steady. He could feel it on the back of his neck, working through the collar of his jacket. He reached the back of the property and stopped at the gate. The gate was open. Not open like it had been left open like it had been pushed. The latch was intact, but the gate itself had swung inward at an angle that suggested force rather than casual passage. Bear's hand went to his side. He went through the gate. The back porch light was off. The one lit window was on the left side, but curtained, the amber light diffused through fabric. Bear moved along the back wall of the house to the window and stopped beside it and listened. Voices. More than one. The quality of the sound, the specific acoustic texture of voices inside a contained space, told him there were at least 3 people in the back room. 2 of the voices had the controlled, professional cadence of people who were conducting rather than responding. One was a woman. The woman's voice was level, not panicked. But there was something in it, a compressed quality, the voice of someone who has decided not to give whoever is listening the satisfaction of fear but is carrying it underneath every syllable. Bear went back to the gate. He found Ghost 6 feet behind him. 3 people, Bear said, 2 of them Meridian. They're already inside. Something happened in Ghost's face. The decade of isolation, the calculation, the careful controlled patience. It all shifted, and underneath it, for just a second, was the unfiltered face of a man who had spent 10 years trying to protect one person and was looking at the moment where it might not have been enough. "How long have they been in there?" Ghost said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know," Bear said. "But she's talking. She's still—" "I need to get in there," Ghost said. "We get in together," Bear said. "Snake covers the front. We go through the back." He turned back toward where they'd left Snake and Lena. Snake was there. Lena was not. Bear's stomach dropped. "Where is she?" he said. Snake turned, looked at the space where Lena had been standing beside his bike, the wet ground, the darkness. "She was here," Snake said. "She was right." A sound from inside the house. Not a voice. A sharp, percussive sound. Something falling or being thrown, and the specific quality of sudden movement that comes through walls when something that was stationary suddenly isn't. And then, very clearly, through the curtained window, a child's voice. Lena's voice. "Hey!" One word, loud, deliberate. The voice of someone who had made a choice. Bear was already moving. He hit the back door at full speed, and it came off the frame on the first impact. Old wood, old lock, no contest. And he was through it and into a narrow back hallway, and through that into the lit room in 3 seconds, Ghost directly behind him. The scene arranged itself in front of him like a photograph. A woman, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, sitting rigidly in a straight-back chair with her hands on her knees, and the specific controlled stillness of someone who has been told to stay still and is complying while calculating. This was Vera Mack, Vera Caruso, Ghost's witness, Hound's sister, 9 years of hidden life present in every line of her face. Two men. Both turned now toward the door Bear had just destroyed, both in the dark professional clothing that Meridian apparently issued as standard. One had something in his hand, not drawn, not yet, the fraction of a second delay of someone whose attention had been split. And Lena. She was standing in the doorway from the front hallway. She'd gone around the house, through the front, while Bear went to the back, and she'd come in through an unlocked front door that the Meridian operatives had apparently entered through and not relocked behind them, the specific small carelessness of professionals who believe they control the situation. She had walked in and said, "Hey," and for the critical second between her appearing and Bear coming through the back door, both operatives' attention had been divided between the back of the house and the small girl in the hallway. That second was enough. Bear moved on the nearer operative with the focused efficiency of a man who has been in enough confrontations to have no wasted motion, no wind-up, no announcement, the controlled kinetic violence of someone who has accepted what the situation requires and is executing it. The operative was bigger and trained and fast, and none of that fully compensated for the specific combination of Bear's size, his forward momentum through the door, and the critical half-second he had over the man's reaction time. Ghost went past Bear for the second operative, and this, Bear caught in his peripheral vision, was different. This was a decade of precision and contained fury released into a space approximately 8 feet by 10, and the second operative, whatever his training, encountered something it had not prepared him for. It lasted 9 seconds. At the end of 9 seconds, both operatives were on the floor. Not dead. Bear had been deliberate about that, but not mobile, not a threat. Bear was breathing hard, his hands feeling the familiar post-contact tremor that adrenaline produces and that he'd learned decades ago to let move through him without fighting it. His right shoulder had taken an impact at some point. He could feel it already, a deep bruise forming, the specific throb of something that was going to make itself known for a week. Ghost stood up from the floor. He looked at Vera. She looked at him. 9 years of silence between two people who had once trusted each other with everything, across a small room in a house in a town that was supposed to be safe. "Elias," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She stood up from the chair. She was steadier on her feet than most people would have been. She looked at Bear, at Lena, at the two men on the floor. "They've been here 40 minutes. They were asking about documents. About files I supposedly kept." She paused. "I didn't give them anything." "I know," Ghost said. "You never did." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Lena. "Who is this?" she asked. "My daughter," Ghost said. Something moved across Vera's face. Surprise, recognition, a rapid reassembly of things she thought she understood. "Carmen's," she said. "Yes." Vera looked at Lena for a long moment. Then she did something that apparently surprised even herself. She exhaled, long and slow, and the exhale carried 9 years of compression in it. "I have the files," she said, "the ones they were asking about." She looked at Ghost. "I never moved them out. You told me to keep them somewhere I could get to in under 5 minutes. They're still there." "Where?" Bear said. She told him. Snake was through the back door 2 minutes later with his laptop bag and a flashlight, and Bear and Ghost followed Vera through the house to the front bedroom closet and behind the back wall of the closet, a panel that looked original but wasn't, installed 9 years ago by a man with the specific skills of someone who had spent his life hiding things. There was a fireproof case. Snake had it open in 90 seconds. Inside, a hard drive, a sealed envelope of printed documents, a USB drive, and a handwritten ledger in small, precise handwriting that was Vera's. 9 years of additional documentation, names and dates and figures she'd continued to compile from memory after Ghost's arrest, everything she'd carried in her head turned into paper. Snake looked at the contents of the case with the expression of a man confirming something he'd been hoping was real. "This is it," he said. "Bear, this is enough." But Bear was looking at his phone, a text from Frankie. "Voss's vehicles moved, heading north, 20 minutes out at best estimate. They know." He showed it to Ghost. Ghost read it and handed the phone back. Then we don't have 20 minutes, Ghost said. We have less. And outside from the south, the sound of vehicles moving fast on the county road, not one, not two, the specific layered sound of multiple engines coordinated, reached them through the window of the small house in Trestle Junction. Coming north. Coming fast. Snake had the hard drive and the USB and the ledger. He closed the case. He looked at Bear, the federal investigator Ghost mentioned, the one he trusted before the arrest. Is there still a contact? Ghost said, There is. How fast can we get this to them? If I can get to a secure uplink. How fast? Snake said. 2 hours, Ghost said, if nothing stops us. The vehicle sounds outside were closer now. Bear looked at Lena. She was standing in the bedroom doorway, taking up as little space as possible, watching everything with those dark eyes that had been absorbing the world for the past 6 hours without flinching. Lena, Bear said, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Exactly. No variations. Okay, she said. Whatever happens in the next 20 minutes, you stay behind me, not beside me. Behind. Okay, she said again. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to get down, you get down. If I tell you to be quiet, I understand, she said, with a patience that suggested she had understood from the moment she walked through the clubhouse door 6 hours ago and had simply been waiting for everyone else to catch up. Bear almost said something else. Headlights swept across the bedroom window, the first vehicle turning off the county road into the residential street. Then a second set. Then a third. They'd brought more vehicles this time. Ghost looked at the window, then at the case in Snake's hands, then at Bear. There's a way out, Ghost said, but it means splitting again, and it means one of us draws them while the other two get the files to the uplink. Who draws them? Bear said. Ghost looked at him. No, Bear said. Bear, I said no, Bear said. Not like this. Not after tonight. You don't get to disappear again. He held Ghost's gaze. We find another way. The headlights outside were stationary now, doors opening, the sound of boots on the wet road. Vera spoke from behind them both. The grain elevator, she said, at the south end of town. The service road behind it connects to the county road past the ridge. They won't know it. She paused. And there's something there they won't expect. What? Bear said. She looked at the window, the lights, the shapes moving outside with professional patience. Dex told me, she said, when he set me up here. He said if it ever came to this, if Meridian ever actually found me, the Iron Reapers would come. She paused. He said they wouldn't come alone. Bear's phone lit up. A text from Hound, South Ridge, grain elevator service road. We're here. And below it, a number. Not 4 riders. 14. Bear looked at Ghost. Ghost read the text. For the first time since he'd walked through the back door of the clubhouse 4 hours ago, something happened in Ghost's face that was not calculation, not control, not the compressed expression of a man managing 10 years of survival instincts. Something broke open, just for a second. Move, Bear said. They moved. Through the back of the house, through the gate, through the darkness toward the grain elevator and the service road and the 14 riders that Hound had been quietly, carefully assembling for 3 days without telling anyone. Not because he was hiding it, but because some things you do not announce until the moment arrives. And the moment had arrived, and Dex Riley had spent 10 years carrying the weight of what he knew, and tonight he was laying it down the only way he knew how. Behind them, Harlan Voss and his Meridian operatives secured the perimeter of a house that was empty. Ahead of them, on a service road behind a grain elevator in a small town that nobody outside a 50-mile radius had ever heard of, 14 Iron Reapers sat on idling Harleys in the cold and the dark, their engines running low, their breath coming out in clouds, waiting for whatever came next with the specific patience of men who had learned that the waiting was always part of it. Bear came through the tree line first. He saw them. He stopped for a second. 14 machines. 14 men. The red and black of the Iron Reaper's patch multiplied across the darkness, the low idle of the engines a sound that he felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. And at the front of the group, on his machine, Hound, looking at Bear. Then past Bear, at Ghost emerging from the trees. Hound and Ghost looked at each other for the first time in 10 years. Neither of them spoke. And then, from somewhere behind the tree line, they'd just come through. Close, very close, closing fast. The sound of Voss's vehicles finding the service road. Bear got on his machine. He looked back at Lena, at Ghost helping her onto the seat behind him, at the straps pulled tight. He looked at the road ahead. He looked at his brothers. Stay tight, he said. Nobody gets left. He opened the throttle. They came out of Trestle Junction like a river breaking a dam. 14 machines plus 3. Bear, Ghost, Snake. 17. Harleys in the January dark. The service road behind the grain elevator barely wide enough to hold them two abreast. The engine sound multiplying off the elevator walls, and the frozen tree line into something that filled the chest before it filled the ears. Lena held Bear's torso with both arms and pressed her face against the back of his jacket and felt the vibration of the engine in her teeth, in her sternum, in the small bones of her hands. Behind them, the first of Voss's vehicles turned onto the service road and hit the sight of 17 motorcycles accelerating away from it, and for a critical 4 seconds, Bear counted them, felt them. The vehicle didn't move. The psychological weight of 17 machines in coordinated motion, in the dark, in a narrow road, with no room to flank and no room to turn, had done exactly what Bear had understood it would do. It bought 4 seconds. 4 seconds at that speed was a quarter mile. Hound was on Bear's left, slightly behind, riding the way he always rode, low, settled, completely without wasted motion. He had his visor up despite the cold, and Bear could see his face in the peripheral sweep of the headlights. The jaw set, the eyes forward, the specific expression of a man who has made his peace with what is happening and is now simply happening with it. The service road joined the county road at a T-junction, marked by a rusted stop sign that nobody was stopping for tonight, and they made the turn at speed, the formation compressing and expanding in the fluid way of riders who have ridden together long enough to know each other's instincts. And then they were on the county road heading south, and the road was wide and the visibility was clear, and Bear opened up the throttle fully for the first time all night. The Harley responded the way it always responded, with a surge that he felt in his lower back and his hands, the big engine pulling hard, the cold air hitting his face like a wall of water. Behind him, Lena tightened her arms without being told. Snake was running on his secondary device as he rode, which was not safe and which he would do anyway, because Snake's relationship with safety in service of information had always been precisely calibrated to whatever the situation required. He had the hard drive in his bag. He had the USB. He had Vera's ledger sealed in a waterproof document sleeve. He had the contact information for the federal investigator Ghost had named, a woman named Diane Marsh, currently with an independent oversight office that had been established specifically to investigate corruption within federal contracting departments. An office that Meridian had apparently been unable to penetrate because it was new enough that their network hadn't yet reached inside it. They had a 2-hour window. Voss's second vehicle had turned onto the county road behind them. Bear could see the headlights in his mirror set. 2 sets, maybe 3, moving fast. Moving very fast. The kind of fast that said Meridian had finally shed its patience. The road straightened ahead of them, and Bear made a calculation. He pulled alongside Hound. "Split point," Bear said, just loud enough to carry over the engines. Hound looked at him. "You take 12, keep them occupied, South County Road, make it loud." He looked at Hound. "Ghost, Snake, Vera, and I take Lena northwest to the uplink point." Hound held his gaze for a second. "And if they split their vehicles?" "Then we deal with it," Bear said. "But they won't. 12 machines is a bigger problem than 3. Hound gave a single nod. He dropped back, communicated something through hand signals to the riders behind him. And then, at the crossroads a mile ahead, the formation divided, and Hound and 12 machines turned south in a thunder of engines that rolled back up the road like a sound wave, and Bear watched the pursuing headlights in his mirror and watched them, after a second of hesitation that cost them another quarter mile, turn south to follow. 3 machines continued northwest. Bear, Ghost, Snake. Vera on the back of a borrowed machine behind Snake, her arms around him, her head down, 9 years of hiding made mobile and heading toward the thing that ended it. The uplink point was a communications relay station 40 minutes northwest of Trestle Junction, a structure Ghost had identified years earlier during his decade of invisible movement through the region. A civilian telecommunications installation with a data uplink capacity that, accessed through a specific maintenance channel that Snake had theoretically mapped and never actually used, could push an encrypted file package to a secure federal server in under 4 minutes. Theoretically. They arrived at 3:42 in the morning. The station was unattended at this hour. A low concrete building, a tower, a chain-link fence. Ghost cut the fence lock with a tool from his kit with the calm efficiency of a man for whom breaking into infrastructure was simply a competency. And Snake was through the fence and at the maintenance panel in 90 seconds, his hands moving in the cold with the focused speed of someone who has mentally rehearsed a process so many times that the physical execution of it is almost automatic. Bear stood outside the fence line and watched the road in both directions. Ghost stood 6 feet from him and watched the same road. They stood in silence for a moment, the two of them, under the cold open sky that had finally stopped producing rain, the air clear and brutally cold and smelling of wet ground and pine from the tree line 50 yards east. "She's going to need a school," Ghost said. Bear looked at him. "After this," Ghost said, "when it's settled, she's going to need a school and a place to live and a normal routine." He was looking at the road. "I don't know how to give her that. I've been moving for 10 years. I don't know how to stay still anymore." Bear was quiet for a moment. "You'll learn," he said. You'll learn," Bear said again. Not a platitude. A statement of fact, the way Bear stated most things, with the weight of a man who had decided something was true and saw no reason to hedge it. Ghost held the road with his eyes. "She asked me to figure out what it meant," he said, "that she came looking for me." "What does it mean?" Ghost exhaled slowly. The breath crystallized in the cold air and dispersed. "It means I owe her more than I know how to pay." "Then start paying it," Bear said. "That's how it works." Snake called from inside the fence. "I'm in. 4 minutes, maybe 3. Bear watched the road. Ghost watched it with him. 3 minutes and 47 seconds later, Snake said, "It's done." And for a long moment, in the cold dark outside a communications relay station, in a county that most people pass through without stopping, nobody said anything. The call from Diane Marsh's office came 40 minutes later, while they were still riding. Snake had it on speaker through his earpiece, relayed to Bear through the secondary radio they were running. The woman's voice was awake at 4:30 in the morning, with the energized flatness of someone for whom very large things happening at very inconvenient hours was simply the nature of the work. She said the file package had been received and preliminarily authenticated. She said it was enough to issue emergency protective orders within hours. She said she was going to need statements, in person, within 48 hours, from the primary witness and from anyone who had direct knowledge of the evidence chain. She also said, and this was the part that landed differently than the rest, that the name of the official who had orchestrated Ghost's frame-up, the name that Snake had pulled from Meridian's document chain and that Bear had read in the back office of the Iron Reaper's clubhouse 5 hours ago, was a name she had been building a separate case around for 18 months. "You've just given me the piece I was missing," she said. Bear didn't respond to that. He rode. The road home was long and cold, and he had a 10-year-old girl on the back of his bike, and the particular exhaustion in his body that comes not from physical exertion alone, but from the specific expenditure of carrying other people's weight through the dark. He thought about Carmen Alvarez, who had woken up at 4:30 every morning and worked at a diner and kept a bullet in the back cover of her copy of something she held on to, and who had understood for 9 years that the world contained forces that would hurt her if she moved wrong, and who had moved right, consistently, with the patience of a woman who had made a decision about what she was protecting and had never deviated from it. He thought about Hound, somewhere on the South County Road, with 12 machines making enough noise to pull Meridian's attention for the 20 minutes it had taken Snake to reach the uplink. He thought about Frankie holding the clubhouse with 5 men and a performance of normalcy. He thought about Reno, 26 years old, who had joined the club 3 years after Ghost disappeared and had spent tonight becoming a different kind of member than he'd been yesterday. He thought about Ghost, riding slightly ahead of him in the darkness, carrying 10 years of decisions on his back like gear. Heavy, necessary, nobody else's to carry. He thought about the silver bullet pendant in Lena's hoodie pocket, and what it had taken to make it, and what it had taken to protect it, and what it had finally done, carried in a child's fist into a room full of broken men who had stopped expecting things like this to arrive through their doors. Lena's arms around his torso tightened slightly. Not from fear, He had learned to read the difference now. And then loosened, and she settled her weight against his back, and he felt her breathe. He rowed. They came back to Harlan's Creek at 5:58 in the morning. The sky had begun to differentiate from the darkness. Not quite light, not dark anymore. The specific blue-gray quality of an hour that belongs to neither night nor day. The rain had finished. The road was wet and reflective, and the headlights on the last miles home caught every puddle and threw it back. The clubhouse was standing. This was the first thing Bear checked when he turned off Route 9 onto the gravel drive. The building, intact, lights on inside, the silhouette of it against the early sky, the particular relief of a structure that is held. Frankie came out before they'd killed the engines. He looked at Bear, at Lena, at Ghost pulling in behind them, at Snake and Vera behind Ghost, and he put together the story from those images without being told anything. "Anyone hurt?" Bear said. "Denny took something to the shoulder," Frankie said. "Not bad. Voss's people tried the side entrance at about the 2-hour mark. Didn't get far." He paused. Voss himself... He stopped. "What?" "Left," Frankie said. "About 40 minutes ago. All 3 vehicles. No explanation." He looked at Bear. "You want to tell me why?" "Snake sent a file package to a federal oversight office," Bear said. "Voss just lost the operational cover that was protecting him." Frankie absorbed this. "So it's done?" "Not done," Bear said, "but the shape of it has changed." He looked at the building. "We'll know more in 48 hours. He got off the bike. He turned to help Lena down, but she was already off, landing on the gravel with a small impact and straightening up with the careful steadiness of someone whose legs had been in the same position for a long time. She stood in the early light in the oversized hoodie and the 2 big wool socks and the wet canvas shoes, and she looked at the clubhouse, and then she looked at Bear. "Is it over?" she asked. "For tonight," Bear said. She looked at him with the clear, patient eyes of a child who has learned that for tonight is sometimes the best answer available and has decided to treat it as enough. Vera Max stood in this clubhouse main room and looked at her brother. Hound had come back 40 minutes after Bear, 12 machines coming in from the south with the gradual appearance of men who have spent a night doing necessary things and are carrying the evidence of it in their posture and their faces. Nobody had chased them beyond the county line. Meridian's field operation had collapsed the moment the file package hit Diane Marsh's server, the operational support pulling back with the efficiency of an organization that knows when a position is untenable and has the discipline not to throw good money after bad. Hound walked into the clubhouse and saw his sister standing by the bar. 9 years. He stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at him. She had her arms crossed, not closed off, just cold. The posture of someone who has been through an extremely long night and is holding themselves together through the final portion of it. "You look terrible," she said. "You look like someone who's been living under a false name for 9 years, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. "Vera Caruso is a person I remember," she said. "I'll need some time to get used to her again." Hound crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He was Dex Riley, who had been Hound for so long that the name had long since become the man, and he was 53 years old and had been carrying the specific weight of knowing his sister was alive and hidden and unreachable for almost a decade, and none of that was on his face right now because he had decided somewhere between the South County Road and the clubhouse that the weight was done and he was putting it down. He put his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand over his. That was all. It was enough. Ghost found Lena in the storage room at the back. She had gone there after coming inside. Not hiding, just finding a quieter space away from the movement and the voices and the managed chaos of a large group of people processing a long night. She was sitting on the same overturned crate that Ghost had sat on hours earlier, her feet on the floor, her hands in her lap, the pendant in her palm. The silver bullet. She'd taken it out of her pocket and was holding it with both hands, not looking at it, just holding it the way you hold something that has traveled a long distance to get to where it is. Ghost sat on a stack of boxes across from her. They sat in silence for a moment. The sounds from the main room filtered through. Voices, the clink of cups, someone's boots on the floor, the low creak of the building settling in the cold. "What happens now?" Lena asked. "We talked to a federal investigator named Diane Marsh," Ghost said. "You and I and Vera. We give statements. We hand over what we have." "And then?" And then the people who built what was done to me have to answer for it, Ghost said. It won't be fast, it might not even be clean, but it will happen. Lena turned the bullet over in her hands. My mom never told me this was going to happen, she said. She never told me about any of it, about Meridian or the evidence or any of it. She paused. She just said find the Iron Reapers. She said they would know what to do. She was right, Ghost said. She trusted them more than she trusted most people, Lena said. She said some people are trustworthy because of what they have to lose. She looked up. She said the Iron Reapers were trustworthy because of what they'd already lost. Ghost looked at her. The light in the storage room was a single bulb overhead, and it fell on the bullet in her hands and on her face and on the space between them that was 10 years wide and was slowly beginning to have a floor. I want to keep it, Lena said. She meant the bullet. I know it's evidence, but I'll make you another one, Ghost said. She looked at him. Same markings, he said. Not evidence, just yours. He held her gaze. The one in your hand goes to Marsh. What I make you keeps. She looked at the bullet. When did you make it? She said. The original. When did you make it for my mom? The night before they arrested me, Ghost said. I knew it was coming. I didn't know how fast. He stopped. I gave it to her and I told her the same thing I just told you, that I'd make her a new one when it was over. He paused. I ran out of time. Lena held the bullet a moment longer. Then she placed it on the crate beside her, carefully, with the deliberateness of someone concluding something. And she looked at Ghost. Make it better this time, she said. The new one. I will, Ghost said. And don't disappear again, she said. It was not a plea. It was a statement of terms, issued with the clarity of someone who has decided they deserve to state them. No, Ghost said. I won't. She looked at him for a long moment, applying the same calibration she'd been applying to every person in this building for the past 12 hours. The careful measuring tool she'd developed in a 2-room apartment in Mill Haven, reading people against what they said and what they did, and the distance between the two. She apparently found what she was looking for. She got off the crate. She walked across the space between them, and she stood in front of Ghost, and she did something that was, for a person of her particular disposition, a significant gesture. She didn't hug him. She put her hand on his arm, briefly, her small fingers over the leather of his jacket. 1 second, 2. Then she walked toward the door to the main room. She stopped in the doorway. You need coffee, she said, not turning around. You look like you haven't slept in 3 days. I haven't, Ghost said. Then come get coffee, she said. I know where they keep it. She went through the door. Ghost sat on the stack of boxes for a moment. He looked at the empty crate where she'd been sitting. At the indentation her weight had left in the old canvas cover, at the place where the bullet had been. Then he got up and followed his daughter into the main room. The diner was called May's, and it was on the far end of the main street of Harlan's Creek, and it opened at 6, and at 6:15 it held 12 Iron Reapers and 2 women and 1 10-year-old girl, occupying every table and most of the counter stools, filling the small space with the particular ambience of large, road-worn men who have survived a night and are now occupying the specific moment between survival and whatever comes next. May herself was 71 years old and had been opening this diner at 6 in the morning for 31 years and had seen many things come through her door. She brought coffee to every table without being asked, because that was what the morning required. The coffee was in heavy ceramic mugs, white, the kind that retain heat and feel substantial in the hand. Bear wrapped both hands around his and sat at the corner table and let the warmth come through the ceramic into his palms, and he sat with the specific stillness of a man who has nowhere to be for the first time in many hours and has not yet fully accepted that. His shoulder ached. The bruise had settled in fully during the ride, a deep radiating throb that he knew from experience would peak tomorrow and take a week to clear. He breathed through it, let it be what it was. Across the diner, Lena sat at the counter on a stool that was slightly too tall for her, and May had given her a hot chocolate without being asked because May had a particular read on what people needed, and the read was rarely wrong. Lena had her hands around the mug, and she was watching the window, watching the early light coming up over the street, the sky moving through its gradation from gray-blue to something warmer. Ghost sat 2 stools down from her. He had a coffee he hadn't touched yet. I was watching Lena watch the window. He He was doing it with the careful attention of a man who is memorizing something. The specific angle of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head slightly when she was thinking, the small, unconscious expression that moved across her face when the light changed outside. 10 years of absence being slowly filled in, one observation at a time. Hound sat at the long table in the middle of the diner with his sister beside him, and both of them with coffee, and neither of them talking much, which was the right amount for two people who had been separated by 9 years of silence and had the rest of their lives to fill it in. Vera had called Diane Marsh's office at 5:45. Marsh had arranged federal transport to arrive in Harlan's Creek by noon. In the meantime, Vera was to stay with people who could be accounted for, and the file package was authenticated and in protective custody, and the emergency protective orders were already in motion. Snake sat at his own table with his laptop, because Snake did not stop working simply because the acute crisis phase had ended. He was building the evidentiary brief that Marsh's office would use, cross-referencing the Meridian documents against the 10 years of public record that had accrued in Ghost's absence, the promotions, the continued operations, the lives that had continued undisrupted while Ghost ran, and Carmen Alvarez worked early shifts and Vera Mack learned to be someone else. He worked without being asked, because that was what the situation required, and because Snake understood, perhaps better than anyone in the room, that the battle in the field was one thing, and the battle in the document was another, and the second one was the one that determined whether the first one mattered. Bear watched the diner. He watched his brothers filling the booths and the counter stools, their faces in the early light stripped of the particular expression that men wear in darkness and pressure. The stripped-back look of people who are simply present, simply alive, simply occupying the morning after a long night. Frankie with his elbows on the table and his eyes half closed. Reno with his hands around a mug looking slightly older than he had yesterday evening, which was not a bad thing. Denny Reeves with his left shoulder bandaged, eating eggs like a man who has been told by his body that it needs fuel and has decided to comply. The smell of the diner was coffee and butter and the particular warmth of an enclosed space with good heating on a cold morning, and it was the most ordinary smell in the world, and it settled over Bear like something he hadn't known he needed. He thought about Carmen Alvarez's laugh, the one Lena had described, the one that turned the whole diner around. He thought about a woman who had kept a bullet for 10 years and raised a daughter alone and died from ordinary things, and about how the ordinary things were sometimes the ones with the sharpest edges. He thought about what the town thought of the Iron Reapers, the tattoos, the motorcycles, the scars, the way people's eyes moved when the club came through, the version of these men that existed in the assumptions of strangers. I thought about 12 hours ago when a small girl had walked through the clubhouse door in the rain. Lena was still at this counter when Bear walked over and sat on the stool on her other side. She looked at him. "How are the socks?" he said. She looked down at her feet. The wool socks were inside the canvas shoes, which were still slightly damp. "Good," she said. "You can have them back." "Keep them," Bear said. She looked at the window again. The street was beginning to show its morning shape. A car, someone walking, the gradual resumption of an ordinary town doing ordinary things in ordinary light. "My mom would have liked this diner," she said. "Yeah?" "She liked places where you could get coffee and sit and watch people." Lena turned the hot chocolate in her hands. She said it was the best thing in the world, a cup of something hot and a window to look out of. She paused. She said most of the good thinking happens in places like that. Bear looked at the window. "She sounds like she was smart." "She was," Lena said. "About most things." A pause. "She was wrong about one." Bear waited. "She said I'd have to do this part alone," Lena said. "The coming here, the asking for help." She looked at the counter. "She said she was sorry she couldn't be there to do it with me." A breath. "But she thought I'd have to do the hard part by myself, and then, maybe, the people here would help with the rest." Bear was quiet. "She underestimated you," Lena said. "All of you." She looked at him with those dark, calibrating eyes that had been reading rooms and people and distances all night. "She thought you'd help because it was the right thing to do. She didn't think you'd—" She stopped. "She didn't think you'd actually care." Bear looked at the girl. "I thought about the right thing to say, and then about the wrong thing to say, and then about whether anything needed to be said at all. Your mom kept that bullet for 10 years, he said finally. She sent you to us. She trusted us with the most important thing she had. He looked at the window. That tells me she knew, at some level, that we'd do more than the right thing. He paused. Maybe she just needed you to find out for her. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said very quietly, so that only Bear and the morning light and the smell of coffee could hear it. I think she knew. 4 weeks later, the Iron Reapers held a ceremony. Not a large one, not a gathering or a party or anything that required announcement. Just the members in the clubhouse on a Sunday evening when the weather had finally decided to move towards something approaching the early suggestion of spring, the air outside cold but no longer hostile. Ghost received his patch, the same patch they'd kept in a locked drawer in the back office for 10 years. His original club colors, preserved with the specific care of men who had refused to treat the preservation of it as a certainty, but had done it anyway, because there are some things you do not give up on even when you cannot explain the reason. Bear placed it in Ghost's hands. Ghost held it and looked at it for a long moment, and nobody in the room spoke, because nobody needed to. Then Ghost put it on. The room exhaled. Afterward, the silver bullet pendant, the original, Carmen's, the one that had traveled from Ghost's hands to her daughter's hands, and through a January night in a child's fist, and across county roads, and a communications relay station, and into federal protective custody, came back to the clubhouse in a small package from Diane Marsh's office, released as a personal effect after the evidentiary duplicates were completed. It came back along with a letter confirming the scope of the indictments. 11 individuals, including 2 sitting officials, the operational director who had signed Ghost's arrest warrant, and 6 executive-level personnel within Meridian Strategic Solutions. The letter was technical in its language, precise in the way legal language is precise, but even in the precision, the scope of it was clear. Ghost's record had been vacated 2 weeks earlier, 10 years, 14 days. Snake built a small frame, simple wood, glass front, the kind of thing you could find in any hardware store, and mounted the bullet pendant inside it, not as a trophy, not as a monument to anything that deserved to be monumentalized, as a reminder of the specific chain of hands the thing had passed through and what each of those hands had done to keep it moving. They hung it on the wall of the main room, above the fireplace. Nobody made a speech about it. That was appropriate. Every Sunday, without it becoming a rule, and without anyone decreeing that it should be a ritual, Lena came to the clubhouse. She was enrolled in the school in Harlan's Creek, a decision that had required Ghost to learn, at 44, how to navigate school registration and parent-teacher conference schedules and the specific bureaucracy of being a newly legal person applying for the legal guardianship of his own daughter. He'd had help. The club's lawyer, a small, fierce woman named Patricia Okafor, who had been handling the Iron Reapers' legal matters for 9 years and who had seen many things but never quite this configuration of things, had navigated it with the efficiency of someone who treats complicated cases as interesting rather than burdensome. Ghost rented a house on the north edge of Harlan's Creek. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a front porch that faced the road. He did not know how to make a home. He was learning. He bought a furniture with the specific uncertainty of a man who has been sleeping on whatever is available for a decade and has suddenly been asked to have preferences about sofas. Lena had preferences about sofas. This turned out to be useful. On Sundays, she rode with Ghost to the clubhouse. He had built her a small helmet, custom, fitted, and she wore it with the seriousness of someone who understood that the helmet was not decoration. She rode behind him on the Harley with her arms around his torso, and after a few weeks she started learning the road, anticipating the turns, the lean angles, the moments when the engine note changed. She had opinions about it. Ghost had expected this. At the clubhouse, she had a stool at the bar that had become informally hers, and May's Diner had a regular order for her on Sunday mornings. Hot chocolate, no marshmallows, with a side of whatever May thought she should eat. And she did homework at the big table in the main room sometimes, surrounded by men who collectively didn't know how to help with 7th grade math but were willing to try. Reno turned out to be good at math. Nobody had known this. Lena found out by asking, which was becoming her primary method of finding out things, direct, clear, without the preliminary that most people use to soften a question. She asked, and people answered because the asking was so straightforward that it didn't leave much room for deflection. Dex Riley, Hound, sat at the bar on the 4th Sunday and watched his niece, who was not yet his niece in any legal sense but was in every other sense that mattered, explaining something to Reno with the patience of someone who has learned something and wants to make sure the other person actually understands it, rather than just agreeing. Vera sat beside him. She was in Harlan's Creek now, not hiding, not under a false name. Vera Caruso again, finding her way back into a life that had been paused for 9 years and was still warm underneath the pause. She'd taken a job with Patricia Okafor's office, which had turned out to need someone with her specific competency set, and which she had turned out to find genuinely sustaining. "She's Carmen's daughter," Vera said, watching Lena explain something to Reno. "Yeah," Hound said. "You can see it in everything she does." "Yeah," Hound said again. Vera was quiet for a moment. "She's going to be extraordinary," she said. Hound looked at his niece. "She already is," he said. "But…" Bear stood outside on the evening of the last Sunday in February, on the porch of the clubhouse, with a cup of coffee and the cold air and the specific quality of light that comes just before full dark, the sky still holding a thin line of orange above the tree line to the west. He heard the door open behind him. Ghost came out and stood beside him and leaned against the porch rail. Neither of them spoke for a while. The engines of the machines lined up in the lot ticked quietly as they cooled. Somewhere inside, a laugh. Reno, by the sound of it, probably losing at something. The low murmur of the main room through the walls. "She asked me today," Ghost said, "what the patch means." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it means you're accountable," Ghost said. "To the men beside you. You show up. You do what needs doing. You don't leave someone standing in the cold." He paused. "She asked if that's why I came back." "What did you say?" "I said I came back because it was time," Ghost said. "Because the thing I was protecting had changed shape. Because the people I was protecting it from had finally been made to answer for it." He looked at the tree line. "And because 10 years is long enough to be absent from the things that matter." Bear drank his coffee. "She seemed to accept that," Ghost said. "She seems to accept most things," Bear said. "She just decides what she's willing to let go of and what she's going to keep holding." Ghost nodded slowly. "She's going to hold this," he said. "What happened, what her mother did, the night she walked in." He said it without weight, without worry, as an observation. "She's not going to put it down." "No," Bear said, "but she doesn't need to. She's going to carry it the right way." He looked at the orange line of sky, same as her mother did. Ghost held the railing and said nothing. Inside the clubhouse, the sounds of the evening continued. Voices, the creak of the floorboards, the low murmur of men who had been through something together, and were now, gradually, in the way of people who don't process things out loud, putting it into place, finding where it fit in the long story of who they were, making room for it. Above the fireplace, the silver bullet caught the light from the neon signs, the red and the blue, and held it. Outside, the last of the daylight went out of the sky. The town was there, in the dark, doing what towns do, going about its business, tending its ordinary life, unaware as it had always been of what existed in the old building on the edge of Route 9. The tattoos and the motorcycles and the scars and the noise and the weight these men carried without being asked to explain it. The town feared the Iron Reapers. It saw what was visible and drew the conclusions available from what was visible. It did not see what happened on a January night when a girl walked through a door. It did not see the wool socks or the hot chocolate or the homework at the long table or the custom helmet or the stool at the bar. It did not see Hound's hand on Vera's shoulder. It did not see Ghost's face the moment his daughter said, "Come get coffee." It did not see Bear outside on a February evening with his coffee going cold in his hands, standing next to the man they'd kept a patch for in a locked drawer for 10 years, listening to the sounds of his brothers inside and thinking about how the most important things that happen in a life rarely look, from the outside, like anything at all. The door opened behind them. Lena came out. She stood between them, not leaning on anyone, just standing in the cold evening air, the tiny leather jacket the brothers had made her zip to the collar, her hair pulled back, her breath coming out in small, even clouds. She looked at the parking lot, at the row of machines, at the sky. "It's cold," she said. "Yeah," Bear said. "We should go back inside," she said. "In a minute," Bear said. She stood between them in the cold for a minute, and then she said, not to either of them in particular, to the dark and the cold air, and the tree line and the machines cooling in the lot, she said simply, "It's okay here." She went back inside. The door closed. The cold evening held. Bear and Ghost stood on the porch of the Iron Reaper's clubhouse on the edge of Route 9, and the town was out there in the dark thinking what it thought, and in here there was coffee and neon light and the sounds of brothers and a stool at the bar with a name on it that nobody had written down but everybody knew. That was enough. That was, after everything, exactly enough.